Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. In today's topic, called the Audacity against Critical Race Theory Agenda. Again, the topic today is the Audacity against Critical Race Theory Agenda. Because that is extremely what it is, an agenda or agendas on quite a number of people who have the audacityness to be against critical race theory. And many times they have no idea on what critical race theory is, because it's not a one situation or one category or one direction about critical race theory. And that's the insaneness that numbers of personnel have. Now, especially within the predominate culture, because you have to ask yourself this question: within a country, who would be the overall personnel that will control political policy, laws, propagandists overall? Who would that be? Would it be African ancestors, Native blacks? No. Would it be Hispanics? No. Would it be Asians? No. Would it be what we call Native Americans? No. So then who would control the overallness of the direction of how personnel want various part within a country to go and the way they want them to look at things? See, it's an interesting thing, because that's that critical race theory as well. They're trying to blame personnel within the category of race, but relating to white. Who came up with the racial categories? Was it African ancestors, Native blacks? Was it Hispanics? No. Was it Asians? No. Was it what we call Native Americans? No. See, you have the audacity again, or the person have the audacity to be against critical race theory because you have personnel within the predominant culture, right, that do not want any type of accountability relating to the racial context of various parts of the racial foundationness of within the country for generations. They just don't want that to happen. Now, even though, again, beyond logical sense, we'll say, oh, okay, just like any other culture, do you not have numbers of good and bad African ancestors, Native blacks? Of course. Do you not have good and bad Hispanics? Right. Do you not have good and bad personnel? Asians? Of course. Do you not have bad personnel within what we call Native Americans? Of course. But you have numbers of personnel within the predominant culture that do not want any kind of accountability. Nada. Nunca. They don't want nothing to have accountability to critical race theory. So it's like the greatness of Dr. Francis Creswell. Great African ancestry, Native black cultural teacher, right? The genetic annihilation. You got numbers of personnel within the predominant culture are very afraid of geneticness of annihilation, right? Many are a non-small percentage of personnel within the predominant culture. They are very afraid of phenotype destructionality. They are very afraid of phenotype destructionality, right? Now, even though, again, to each of their own of who they want to marry, a person wants to get with, I don't even get into all that, right? I don't even get into all that. But see, it's interesting because, again, you have personnel within predominant culture that don't have anything to do with critical race theory, right? Because it is an internal guilt part There's like, oh, wow, wow. Well, let me rephrase this, because there are numbers of personnel within the predominant culture that have some illogicalness and some extreme deflectionary deniability within that generational ingrained racial anti-hatred of blacks. It is. Now, even though, again, there are some numbers of personnel within the predominant culture who have helped numbers of African and Native blacks in various types of civil rights, right? Even though in the enslavement situation, you had however numbers of personnel within the predominant culture you helped out. So it is illogical and nonsensical for anybody overall to think that that was not true. Right. The problem is that would have been a small overall percentage points, right? Because if there's more than half a personnel within the predominant culture, that means that then that should overrule the smaller amount, right? That would have been a minority in making political laws and policies and things like that, which that logical sense says apparently then they have to be more than 50% of personnel within the predominant culture that couldn't stand African ancestors, Native blacks. That's reality. That is logic. But you got personnel that have the audacity to be against critical race theory. Oh, man, how outlandish, right? Now, with that being said, I must relay this. Supremacy, what I like to call supremacy, is the most awesome mental manipulation force that has ever existed. Let me say it again. Supremacy, the most awesome mental manipulation force that has ever existed, right? The type of masterful manipulation tactics that they do is masterfully, right? It's brilliant. Let me throw this out to you for the person who may not have heard about this book called Propaganda, and some ones that have heard of it before, but may not have heard about that in a long time, or not any time recently. In the book called Propaganda, and chapter 1 on the part called Organizing Chaos, let me just read you just a few sentences of that. Okay? In chapter 1 of Propaganda under Organizing Chaos, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Let me read that again. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Woo! We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste formed, our ideals suggested, largely by men and women we have never heard of. Let me read that second part. We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste formed, our ideals suggested, largely by men and women we have never heard of, from a book called Propaganda that was around the late 1920s, almost 4 generations ago, and still major propaganda against a large part of the masses in a democratic society. It's still going on. That ain't me saying that. Look at the book Propaganda for personnel who have not heard that before. And this wasn't who the heck is this person saying that? This was a major figure in history that wrote that book. But see, you have some personnel within the predominant culture that have such deflectionary tactic. It's very difficult for quite a number of personnel within the predominant culture to listen to any kind of truth and reality, which is fine. But see, that is one of the major problems with quite a number of problems that's going on toward the African ancestors Native Black culture. And that is why the African ancestors Native Black culture overall only has half a generation to 1 generation left. And I stand by that. half a generation to one generation left is all but African ancestors, Native blacks overall have for the complete overall destruction of the culture. And supremacy knows that. It ain't me. Supremacy knows this. There's black pain in so many different places. Black pain, black pain, black pain, black pain, black pain, black pain. And we look around, black pain going on within the country. But still, numbers of African ancestors, Native blacks. I'm not talking about sellouts. I'm not talking about ones that are lost, beyond lost, right? I'm talking about the overallness. It doesn't matter overall anymore. Because again, there is that percentage within the culture that are lost. That percentage of the culture that are sellouts. And so for the numbers of the good ones that are trying to do the best they can, keep doing it. Keep doing it. Right? It's like you're trying to go forward, and then you got the ones that are sellouts or the ones that are lost, right? The ones that look in the mirror every freaking day and say, my goodness, why my skin is dark? Or the different shades of melanin. Even though melanation is some of the most powerful type of internal strength that has ever existed is melanation. Why do you think personnel can't help but trying to go get a tan? Why do you have so many people that try to get a tan? Now, some personnel will say all kind of stuff, and that's fine. Some people have different reasons. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when personnel getting that tan, right? Because again, they look in the mirror and say, I want some melanation. Melanation looks a little bit better. But they ain't gonna sit there and tell overallness amount of the culture. Because again, lack of phenotype, lack of melanation means within society in various parts of the globe, it means power, or nothing else, social power. For nothing else, social power. See, that's why a person can have lack of melanation, beyond lack of melanation, and can almost go any place within the country. It could be the poorest of the poorest, but based upon non-melanation, most people wouldn't even say anything to them. Be it they may be poor, maybe not. But based upon a hierarchical of a caste system by depigmentation is a hierarchical of social power no matter what. See, that's why you keep hearing over and over again, and it's going to keep happening. This is June in 2021, and I stand by this because watch still how much black pain is going to be going on in this summertime against African ancestors, Native blacks. Watch how many personnel within culture experience more black pain. Watch. And even after summertime, continuous black pain. Watch what happened. Because it's interesting how, again, the audacity of personnel within the predominate culture and some others, they have the nerve. I don't want to have critical race theory taught in schools. Huh? Obviously, that makes no logical sense. But you have known the personnel within this culture. I mean, not the code. Known the personnel within the predominate culture and some others. Sometimes it misses some logical reality. It's not about that to numbers of personnel within the predominant culture. It's about control. It's about control in some kind of way. Financial control, social control, something. Resource control, something. Right? Genetic control, right? Genetic future control, phenotype control. Because it's an insanity and insanistic type of mentality to have the audacity to be against critical race theory, as if that's some kind of bad word. And critical race theory is not a new type of terminology. Critical race theory has been going on years ago. It's not nothing new, critical race theory. It's not nothing new. But again, supremacy, the most awesome mental manipulation force that's ever existed. They have sit there and figure out this situation to draw up the ire of numbers of persons within the predominant culture and get them all fired up, right, against something, right? something or some things. I don't want the kids to hear anything about critical race theory. How many kids that are taught by their parents or parents, grandparents, except uncles and aunts and stuff like that to use the N word? How many examples have person heard of some youth in some kind of schools using the N word or treating another African or treating an African Native Black youth like they were nothing? How many times, how many stories has this happened? But you got people talking about they don't talk about critical race theory. See, that's some insanity. That's an insaneness of type of personnel. But it's nothing surprising. It's not surprising, right? You know, and there's a biblical wisdom quote I would like to relay over. Okay, you know, this is not about biblical religionality situation. I'm just relaying this in the wisdom concept. But in in Proverbs 23:9, in Proverbs 23:9, it says, "Speak not into the ears of a fool, for he or she will despise the wisdom of thy words." Let me repeat this. In Proverbs 23:9, "Speak not into the ears of a fool, for he or she will despise the wisdom of thou words." Oh my, how powerful is that? Do not speak into the ears of a fool, for they will despise. For they will despise the wisdom of thou words. Right? Because it's an insanistic mentality. It's a very sick mentality mindset, right? To be against critical race theory, right? As if that's some kind of bad word, right? That's an agenda. That's an agenda to deflect that. Again, you got personnel within the predominate culture and some others. They don't have it's like infantile mentality. I don't want to hear anything about race. Well, of course they don't. Why? Because it makes some of them numbers of them feel bad. Even though, again, you better not go to another country or countries, even within America. You better not say, let's not tell the youth about some bad dictator doing this to some other cultures. You better not tell some youth. Or you better not deny some bad dictator did this and did that to another culture and cultures, way in another country or countries. You better not do that. And you surely better not sit there and teach. You better not. You better not sit there and say, we don't need to teach the children that the white man took what we call the Native Americans from their land. We're tired of hearing about that. You better not tell the youth, and that youth get back to that person's parents or uncles or grandparents or whomever, and watch how fast they be up to that school saying, hey, we can't have that. You're not going to sit there and dictate talking about the white man took the what we call non-stuck. Oh, excuse me. What we took anyway, because I don't go on there because that's a whole different concept. You're not gonna sit. They'll be up there real fast at the school saying, "Hey, you can't tell. You can't sit there and tell the youth, or they cannot. They're not going to allow teachers to sit there and withdraw numbers of personnel within the Native American, what we call Native American. You're not going to sit there and say, hey, we're not going to talk about that no more. That's not going to happen. But you see how this goes, right? But when numbers of African descent Native blacks bring up reality of black pain, oh, let's put in the past. Oh, no critical race theory. That's insanity, isn't it? Let me make another point on this. Let's go with 1776, right? Let's go with 1776. So isn't 1776 taught continuously in schools? Is it not? Of course. Is 1776 talking? I mean, my goodness, whatever other grades, 12th grade and below, how many grades are taught about 1776 and patrioticness? How many? The Pledge of Allegiance. Hmm? 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 How many people get so mad when some African ancestors, Native blacks say, "Oh, we don't want that to be really the person's child, children, or grandchildren, or a grandchild, niece, and however." Oh no, we don't want them to sit there and do that. And you got numbers of personnel within a predominant culture. Oh, that's racism. That's unpatriotic. When the top culture in this country, in America, who has been the most patriotic, and while sitting there besetting upon themselves by other personnel with black pain as African ancestors, Native blacks, have been the most patriotic and going through you know what devilish black painness. What an insult. But you got numbers of personnel that have mental sickness, mental racial sickness in a mindset. Now, I'm not talking about, see again, it's like almost like infantile conversation. Of course, again, there were some numbers of personnel within predominant culture. Not talking about that small percentage. I'm not going to waste my time saying that again. That's beyond logic. Not going to play that game. Not going to bring up in this conversation again because that should be beyond logic. But 1776, right? That's consistently talked about, right? 1776, 1776, 1777. I mean, look at your watches or clocks. 1776, look at 1776. Look at your cell phones, tablets, laptops, etc. 1776. Patrioticness. Oh, the colonists. Oh, the colonists. Propagandists, right? You got to have that. Oh, the colonists wanted to fight back against an oppressive regime that wanted to control them and how they thought. that is mentally put within how many type of youth in school time, in colleges, however it go, make 1776, right? What was going on in 1776 as well? 1776, what was going on? Still, African ancestors, Native blacks were enslavement. Numbers of African ancestors, Native blacks were in enslavement in 1776. But you got a person that has the audacity talking about, I don't talk about critical race theory because I don't want them talking about, whites are doing this and doing that. Do you see the absurdness of that, right? 1776 is okay to talk about, but in 1776, African ancestors, Native blacks were still in bondage and enslavement, and however many people had auction blocks. They weren't doing this toward numbers of were they doing this toward what we call Caucasian women? Were they sitting there auctioning them off? In 1776, were what we call Caucasian women, which is very generic. Were they enslaved in 1776? Of course not. What we call numbers of Hispanic personnel, were they being enslaved in 1776 on plantations? Of course not. Were they sitting there enslaving numbers of Asian personnel in 1776, right, in plantations? Of course not. Now again, I'm gonna say this one last time. I'm gonna say this one time on this. The numbers of Hispanic persons that are good. Keep doing your thing. You know who you are. The numbers of Asian personnel who are good. You know who you are. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the ones that are playing games and playing people of color games and playing that atrocious minority game. You know who you are as well. I know that game extremely well. I know when you got numbers of personnel within a Hispanic culture. I know when numbers of personnel Asian culture, even numbers of personnel within what we call Native Americans, right, that play the people of color minority game. I know that's extremely well. The problem is there's not enough African ancestors Native blacks that know that game very well. It is an insult. It is an insult, right? Not to bring that up and put those things in logical analysis and call out personnel and checkmate people within those cultures who try to play that atrocious game. right? But African ancestors, Native blacks can't even get no reparations, right? Think about that nonsense. Can't even get no reparations, right? But real fast, what just happened this year? What we call Asians, which again is very generically, because again, most people want to talk about in the context within the country. You still have however many of Asian personnel that can't stand numbers of other Asian personnel. There's still an intra-Asiatic conflict among each other. There is a caste system within the Asiatic culture in the country, just like overseas. There is an Asiatic caste system. But you got personnel that don't want to bring that part up. That's why history is so important. Just like numbers of Hispanic personnel. Again, numbers of good Hispanic personnel, keep doing your thing. At the same time, you got Harvard types of Hispanic caste system, ones that can't stand other Hispanics. The ones that know I'm talking about. Y'all know numbers of Hispanics that can't stand other Hispanic personnel because they have a caste system as well, an internal intra-caste system. But again, the audacity against critical race theory, right? Don't want to talk anything about it doing race when it's against African ancestors, Native blacks. But what just happened, what we call Asian personnel, which is a very generic terminology because there are, again, numbers of Asian personnel that don't, however numbers of other Asian personnel that don't even like to really be called Asian, and try to incorporate them in some monolithic category. There are some that can't stand that. They want their own type of, categories. But shh, it's another category on that, isn't it? But in 1776, numbers of African ancestors, Native blacks were enslaved. But you're not supposed to talk about that because of what? It's critical race theory? That's disgusting, right? Kind of deflectionary tactic, right? So after 1865, right, which is supposed to be what? The formal abolition of enslaved blacks. Just let them go out into oblivion, right? With no reparations. But let's not talk about, but generations before that, African ancestors, Native blacks overall were in enslavement within the country, right? Getting numbers of persons within the predominate culture getting free labor off of black pain, but no reparations. But don't talk about that because that's critical race theory. We don't want to talk about that. Right? In 1865, you go almost 100 years later, 1965, still fighting, still African ancestors, Native blacks, still fighting for the right to vote. Why would you need voting rights after 1965 if still it's supposed to be some kind of racial voting equilibrium? Because there's no such darn thing as racial voting equilibrium. Why would you need again voting rights of 1965 for that? Almost 65 years, 100 years, 4 generations, 1865, 1965, 100 years, right? And still African ancestors, Native blacks were still going through, you know what? 100 years later in the 60s, and only a few years before that, Rosa Parks in the 50s was sitting there fighting against, segregated buses? Do you see the hypocrisy of this, right? Not talking about don't want to talk about critical race theory. Oh, I want people talking about, the country had racism. Man, go somewhere with that nonsense. Go jump into a volcano. It's disgusting. It is an insult to the foremothers and forefathers, and four grandmothers, four grandfathers, four uncles and aunts, etc., right? Ones that are still alive, that seen colored signs, that could not ride on the darn same bus as predominate culture, could not go to any hotels and motels, could not go to any type of movie theaters, color section. Do you remember in the 50s and 60s? Show me where the comparison where you sit there and say, we got Asian section, right? Asian section movie theater. Show me where we're talking about there's an Hispanic section in a movie theater. Show me what we call a Native American section. Do you know how silly that sounds? You got the nerve of some people that try to play the games. Oh, well, they certain time they say Indians can go. Man, shut up with that nonsense. Don't even play that game. There's no comparison. That's like you comparing an infant to a true professor-like type personnel. That's the equation of equating some extremely small amount. Oh, well, Indians can go over. Which Indians? How many personnel still look like personnel within a predominant-based culture were able to hide within the predominant-based culture? Go somewhere with that, because that's a whole new different topic. Not going to discuss that with that part. Not going to discuss that. But it's just interesting how, it's so easy to put chronological order just utilizing 1776, right? As I just did, right? And they ain't talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, right? So you're still talking about getting close to 100 years from 1776, right, to 1863. Still 1776 to 1863. Still talking about 100 some years. 1776 to 1863. Right? 1776 to 1863. Almost 100 years still. And what was going on between 1776 and 1863? African ancestors, Native Black people overall still in enslavement. Now, this is supposed to be after 1776, right? When all men and supposed to be created equal and all that kind of stuff. Which obviously wasn't talking about black males, and they certainly wasn't talking about black women. But you got people talking about critical race theory. Let's not talk about that. We don't want to have people think the country is racist. What the heck you? I'm sorry, excuse me. What are you talking about? A lot of parts of the country was based upon a lot of racism toward African and Native Blacks. It is ridiculous and it is insulting. Because when I look at this kind of stuff, it is so insulting, the nerve of numbers of personnel within the predominant-based culture. And also what I like to call their assistants. The ones that want to be like personnel within the predominant-based culture, right? But they sit there and ride along. They play both fences. They try to be like the person within the predominant-based culture. At the same time, they stay in another lane relating to people of color, minority, right? And they sit there playing millions of, and they sit there and play a lot of African ancestry people. I'm getting that, and it's disgusting because there's not enough African ancestry Native Blacks that are checkmating them. People when they try to play that kind of game. So again, this critical race theory thing, it's a brilliant agenda that people are trying to deflect from, right? Even though it's so obvious, just from the little parts I've relayed over, how it sounds to sit there and have the audacity to sit there and deny critical race theory as if it was some bad word. But this is the kind of game that's being played by numbers of personnel within the predominant-based culture, right? With their assistants from different other cultures and ethnicities that sit there and play this game of acting like that they are marginalized people, right? When at the same time, they have to go through the same black pain for their own culture of any comparison like African ancestors Native Blacks. There is no comparison. And now continuously we had this thing with the illegal immigration, right? What an insult. So numbers of border breaking illegal immigration personnel every day breaking immigration laws, laughing themselves out, right? With taxpayers' money, using whatever buses or planes, whichever, right? When they're released within society, right? And however many don't even come back to whatever particular date, a date to come back to talk about their situation. They just get themselves in that type of environment by people that look like that person and never show back up at the required date to take care of business on that. Because they sitting around waiting for an opportunity for comprehensive immigration reform. This is the same game that's been played, right? Same game, 1986, the National Immigration Act, 1986, that basically was supposed to take care of protecting the border and things like that. But what happened? Millions of personnel with a stroke of a pen, legal. And so what's happened from 1986 to 2000, still 21? Just catastrophicness of border breaking personnel. You see this game people are playing? Oh, the children, stop playing games. People look it up who don't know how many personnel. I mean, again, you're talking about, we'll never really know how many because you just won't even really know. But I'm sitting there saying, when you look up and you see that however numbers of personnel, or however number of personnel, right, that were not the parent or parents or guardians of the child or children that was brought against brought over the border. However many parents or parents, grandparents or guardians, there were not the biologicalness for that child or children that's brought across the border. You see this disgusting games being played, used as pawns, right? How many personnel break immigration laws that are pregnant, knowing the game, and sit there 7 months, 8 months, go right to right to that darn hospital, clinic, have that child or more children, right? Free health for the child, free witness, free food assistance, etc., etc. Never paid any kind of taxes, not going to pay no taxes, but still can't talk about critical race theory. And you got a person that have the nerve to say, migrants, or whatever the silly terminology they keep trying to play these games with. Oh, they pay taxes. Man, go somewhere with that nonsense, man. Well, they can play that with somebody else, because logical analysis say, how about the gigantic amount of personnel that don't pay a darn thing? Personnel that are breaking illegal immigration laws. How many don't pay a darn thing? But they don't want to talk about that, right? Because they are using them even more to overtake and dissipate the demographical numbers toward African ancestry native blacks as they use in other cultures. African ancestry people better wake up. Now, to some of the personnel from some different cultures, there are very few amount that try to do something and constructive and feel the sympathy for the African ancestry native blacks and try to help. Credit given to you, keep doing your thing. To the other person who know you are, that's disgusting what numbers of personnel are doing. You're riding along the coattails of black pain, right, without ever having to go through any comparison of type of cultural pain that black folks have went through in this country. And to some of the sellouts, right, and other ones, maybe more African ancestry native blacks will just like to call culturally excommunicate them and stop talking to them, right? Only when necessary, because these toad poop sellouts, right? They're sitting there being used and don't even know they're being used, but that's on them. So for the African ancestry native blacks who continue to keep trying to do better, continue to keep trying to do that. Just understand the African ancestry native blacks only have half a generation to one generation left, and it will fall within on individuals trying to do their thing. You know how you hear these movies, catastrophic movies, right, where there's some kind of catastrophic type scenario, right, where you don't have a few type of survivors. This is what's going on. This is what's going to happen to African ancestry native blacks within half a generation, one generation. You're going to look up one day, and all of a sudden it's like catastrophic. It's demographical changes even more, right? And the only person that's going to survive from African ancestry native blacks is a few percentages, right? They're based upon individuals and get around like-minded personnel. So I hope this was an interesting show on that. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP Show.